Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Hopkins. I'm the Associate Director for the Rare and Orphan Disease Programs at CPATH and would like to welcome those of you who are in the room with us, as well as everyone who is joining us virtually. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a few housekeeping announcements, and then we'll open up the meeting. So we are looking forward to sharing rare neurodegenerative disease efforts under the Act for ALS with our partners, FDA and NIH today. Okay, so just a few housekeeping. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after the presentations. We do have a microphone here in the room that will invite people to come up and ask questions when we're ready. For those of you joining us virtually, there is a little bit of a typo here. We are going to ask you to place your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat, please. So if you have questions, please feel welcome to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best at the end of the meeting to relay those questions to our panelists and speakers here in the room. Today's event is being recorded, and there may be photographs taken here in the room. The recording will be made available on the CPATH website and YouTube channel after the event. We'll make sure to get that link out to all participants. For those of you who are joining us here in person, the restrooms, you can just exit the room here to my right, go down the hallway near the security desk, take a right, and down at the end of the hall, you'll find the restrooms. And then if we can ask everyone here in the room to make sure that your cell phones are silenced, we would really appreciate it. And then one last housekeeping for any members of the media or press. Wanted to share press contacts here. If you have any questions, you can reach out to them. Okay, great. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Jacqueline Corrigan-Cray to do some opening remarks.
Good afternoon, and thank you for everyone being in the room and those online. I'm Jacqueline Corrigan-Cray. I'm the Principal Deputy Center Director in the Center for Drugs. And I'm just going to spend a couple minutes maybe just setting the scene. As you know, we've entered now the third year of Act for ALS and the second year of our public-private partnership for rare neurodegenerative diseases. We want to take today to really catch you up on what we've accomplished and where we want to go. You'll hear today about our activities around ALS as well as other neurodegenerative diseases. And we will cover research initiatives funded by FDA as well as NIH and how our public-private partnership is advancing regulatory science. Today, we will largely focus on activities that are right within the realm of Act for ALS and the PPP and the research grants. But I also wanted to make you aware that this is really part of a bigger ecosystem at FDA as we try and advance rare disease development. So I'm just showing you the ARC, the Accelerating Rare Disease Cures program, which is a CEDAR program. There's some links there for you to find out some more information about other things we're doing. For example, we just published a LEADER 3D report, Learning and Education to Advance and Empower Rare Disease Drug Development, that we will be using to create and expand on our educational resources. The other thing I wanted you to be aware of is the new program Support for Clinical Trials Advancing Rare Disease Therapeutics, or START. This was a jointly issued announcement in the Federal Register by CEDAR and CBER. And again, this is going to try and accelerate the pace of development of certain novel drug and biological products that are intended to treat rare diseases by giving selected pilot participants the opportunity to augment our currently available meetings between FDA and sponsors with more sort of rapid and ad hoc communications as needed throughout the development program. I want to highlight that for CEDAR, we've decided to focus on treating rare neurodegenerative conditions, including those of rare genetic metabolic etiology. CBER, and they can say more, are going to address those with unmet medical need for a rare disease or serious condition, which is likely to lead to significant disability or death within the first decade of life. So again, as I said, we are working with Act for ALS, but there is also a lot of other activities to advance rare disease development. Now, we understand that for patients and family members, there's an urgency for new treatments, and waiting for research to yield results may seem too long. I want to assure you that while we certainly understand the need for basic research that will enhance our understanding of the pathology and identify new targets, the goal of the public-private partnership is to translate those discoveries and use existing data to advance more efficient drug development through identification of biomarkers, trial designs, and endpoints. This will enable us to more rapidly identify therapies that have promised to be the cures for tomorrow. To reach this shared goal, we need everyone to work together. We need to hear from patients and caregivers on their priorities. We need sharing of data with appropriate controls for privacy. And we need industry at the table to share their expertise. And finally, we need the resources to support this effort. So I don't want to take up too much more time. I want you to hear from those who are really doing the work. And again, I would not pretend that we can put ourselves in the shoes of patients suffering from one of these diseases or the caregivers, but we're here to listen and work with you. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Jacqueline, and thanks everybody for being here in person, especially for those who joined online. I'm Klaus Romero. I'm the CEO of the Critical Path Institute, and I'm going to amplify what Jacqueline just stated. The whole notion is to maximize the value of every precious data point from every single meaningful source, not just clinical trials, but including clinical trials, and put them through an effort that the FDA helped us get off the ground, the Rare Disease Data and Analytics Platform that is the conduit to transform meaningful patient-level data into actionable solutions to tangible unmet needs in drug development. And how those data, you can connect with Ron after this, because the platform itself provided the foundation for augmenting the positive trial data that led to the approval of a transformative medication for Friedreich's ataxia, which is also in the category of rare neurodegenerative diseases. But we want to do this also with the entire village that CPATH can provide. And that includes putting, of course, CPR&D at the center with ALS and the rest of the rare neurodegenerative diseases at the center, leveraging everything that we have that can contribute to the success of the partnership. From the concentration areas clinically that we have at CPATH in neurology, in pediatrics, and in rare and orphan conditions, to existing consortia that predated the establishment of CPR&D that can be part and are part of CPR&D, namely the Huntington's Consortium and the Ataxias Consortium, the RDCA-DAP platform, and the core competencies that allows us to transform meaningful data into actionable solutions for unmet needs for rare neurodegenerative diseases, ALS, and all the other families of conditions. So today, we're going to have a conversation about how everybody will be invited to join. Everybody's voice will have a contribution, especially a contribution to make sure that we understand what are the tangible unmet needs in drug development for the different conditions, how diseases can learn across diseases, not just from their own previous experience, and how we can turn the utility of the data into maximum added value to accelerate drug development for these conditions. So with that, welcome to the meeting, and Laura will take it away.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Klaus, for that opening. At this time, we're going to go ahead and invite our first speaker up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Needleman. I'm the director of the Orphan Products Grants Program at the FDA in the Office of Orphan Products. And today I'm going to be talking about our efforts relevant to advancing development of the medical products for rare neurodegenerative diseases. So I'll start off with a brief background. We'll talk about our grants programs, specifically our clinical trial grant program, our natural history grant program, and our rare neurodegenerative disease grants program. including what has been done and what fiscal year 24 brings. To start back a little bit, many of you know our office. Our office is the Office of Orphan Products Development. It provides incentives for sponsors to develop products for rare diseases. Our mission is to promote the development of drugs, devices, biologics, as well as medical foods for patients with rare diseases and special populations. And we have several designation programs to do this, as well as several grant programs. One of our major designation programs is the Orphan Drug Designation Program. It provides incentives like tax incentives, exclusivity upon approval, as well as PDUFA waivers of user fees. We'll also have our Rare Pediatric Disease Designation Program and our Humanitarian Use Device Designation Program. In terms of our grants program, we have 4 now. I'm going to be talking about 3 of them. We also have the Pediatric Device Consortia Grants Program, and all of these programs are available to learn more about on our website. So our Orphan Products Grants Program is our longest standing program. It was established back in 1983. Our overall budget is around $19 million. Our goal is to advance the development of orphan products for drugs, biologics, devices, as well as medical foods that demonstrate promise for the diagnosis or treatment for rare diseases or conditions. And under this program, we're able to fund clinical trials as well as natural history grants. In our clinical trial grant program, we have at any one time about 75 ongoing studies. The focus really is on efficiency and innovative trial designs. These grants have helped lead to over 85 product approvals and numerous publications, as well as multiple impacts on the field. Our natural history program was launched in 2016. Currently, we're funding 14 ongoing grants. We funded others, and some of them are ending. This program allows for potential impact on clinical trial development, as well as supporting regulatory decisions. We've seen multiple collaborations through this program with industry and patient groups, as well as numerous publications as well. This slide will show you our history of our funding since our inception back in 1983. As you could see, back in 1983, we started with not so much money. The red bars indicate the authorized amount, and what that means is that's what Congress authorizes the agency to utilize. However, the blue bars are what actually is the appropriated base amount. So that's the actual amount that the program gets to fund for rare disease research. As you can see, we've seen a steady increase. In 2022, that was when the Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grants Program was established, which we saw a bump, as well as in 2023 for additional funding for that program. The green and yellow bars are other supplemental funds that we've secured for the program throughout the years to fund our rare disease research. A little bit about our statistics. Since 1983, we've reviewed over 3,100 grant applications and have provided over $530 million for over 800 rare diseases. And as I mentioned before, our grant program has been used to help support over 85 grant products for rare diseases for over 90 indications. We see about 10% of our studies being used towards helping towards regulatory approval. And the bottom of the slide shows some additional recent approvals that we've had. Again, these are the years that these particular disease and products for these diseases were approved, and our grants were likely somewhat before that. This slide gives you the therapeutic classes represented that we have awarded over the years. As you could see, generally we see a lot of rare cancers, as well as neurology, endocrine, and metabolism, as well as hematology. Those seems to be our bigger indications that we see. Much of this is due to what we get. So who applies for our program, we do know that there are a lot of rare cancers and neurological conditions that are rare. The interesting part here is in that 104 that were neurology, 36 of those were actually for rare neurodegenerative diseases. So 35% of those that we have funded over the time period were actually for rare neurodegenerative diseases within neurology. I wanted to set the stage a little bit to show what we've done prior to 2022 when the Act for ALS was implemented. Prior to 2022, we had funded 32 clinical trials, totaling more than $27 million for rare neurodegenerative diseases. Over $4.5 million of that were specifically for ALS funding, 6 grants specifically. There were 3 natural history studies that totaled over $5.6 million, and we were able to utilize our data from our studies were used to help support 2 approvals for FAP as well as for MPS II. Our Natural History Grants Program, as I mentioned, was launched in 2016 with its first fiscal year of 2017 for funding. That year, we had quite a number of interest in that program, and we were able to support 6 studies, 3 of which were for rare neurodegenerative diseases. We were able to utilize the funding that we had bumped up that year through appropriations, as well as additional funding that we had through NIH collaboration to support these 6 studies. We also, in 2019, reissued this RFA, and we were able to get 2 additional studies funded, for one for thyroid cancer and one for DMD. And then the Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grant Program was established. It was established upon the enactment of the Act for ALS in 2021, and the purpose really was to support grants and contracts for the public and private entities to cover costs of research on, as well as development of, interventions intended to prevent, diagnose, mitigate, treat, and cure ALS and other rare neurodegenerative diseases in kids and adults. You can always learn more about this program on our website. But thinking about that in terms of when our natural history next cycle was, it was in 2022, and in that year, we were able to fund 8 new awards, 3 of which were for rare neurodegenerative diseases, and that was with the support of this additional funding that came that year. In 2023, we had a new RFA specifically for natural histories in rare neurodegenerative diseases, and we were able to take on 5 new studies, 3 of which in ALS and 2 in non-ALS indications. And of course, we're in our 2024 year, so we'll have that later in the year. But as you can see, after the Act for ALS was passed, and in just looking at these 2 particular fiscal years for the Natural History Grants Program, we were able to fund 62% of the awards were for rare neurodegenerative diseases. This slide gives you the overview of everything we funded in 2022 for the Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grants Program when it was first established. Again, the 3 natural history studies I mentioned are listed here, 1 for ALS and 1 for, and 2 non-ALS awards for rare neurodegenerative diseases. And we are also able to fund 2 contracts, one looking for at the ALS functional rating scale in a remote use setting, and then we are also doing a landscape analysis for brain-computer interface, or BCIs, for patients with ALS. In this year, although we got a $2.5 million increase, we were able to leverage that within the agency as well as within NIH, and actually spend over $5.8 million for these projects in that year. In fiscal year 23, we actually had 2 additional RFAs that we put out for that year. One was for seeking natural history studies or biomarker studies in this field, and we were able to fund 5 of those. Again, 3 of those, as I mentioned on the previous slide, for ALS and 2 for non-ALS studies. And then we also had another RFA that year for CBCIs, or communication brain-computer interface reviews, looking to expand clinical outcome assessments for these CBCIs. So that was awarded this last year, as well as an expanded natural history study on a study that we had started funding in fiscal year 22 to really increase in the overall impact of that award. We also co-funded a clinical trial that year for a rare neurodegenerative disease, along with our Orphan Products Grants funding in familial dysautonomia. So this slide is here to represent our impact for Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grants Program. If you strip away kind of the overall indications of what we were funding and think about more of what we were trying to do to inform product development over time, we're really building that basic knowledge base. So the small triangles in here, although maybe difficult to read, has some of the individual impacts of the awards that we funded, and then the red text kind of narrows those down into what we're trying to kind of build up from the bottom up. So in terms of the natural history study, for instance, we're now collecting more biosamples and biorepositories, as well as whole genome sequencing, adding that all in, also learning to characterize the disease and disease phenotypes, looking and learning about the biomarkers for these things and characterizing those in terms of not only diagnosing the diseases as well as monitoring progression. We're looking to learn more about CBCIs and learn about that landscape and how that will help clinical outcome assessments. We're also learning to evaluate a decentralized model and think about tools as well as platforms that could be used for that in future trials, future natural history studies, or future clinical trials. We're learning to develop biomarkers for early progression. So thinking about early disease progression, how can we start treating people earlier? How can we start diagnosing them earlier so then they can be helped earlier and included earlier into trials? And then developing and validating COAs. So all of this sort of leading up to helping regulatory decision-making, as well as increasing clinical trials with novel approaches, innovative designs, and efficient mechanisms. And hopefully that will build that foundational knowledge and move the science forward. So thinking about that in fiscal year 24, we used the concepts and ideas that we obtained from stakeholders to establish a new RFA to address some additional unmet needs in rare neurodegenerative diseases. And we do have a new funding opportunity, which has a receipt date of May 6th this year for natural history and biomarker studies. You can learn more about our funding opportunities online. Specifically, this FOA will have the purpose to support efficient natural history studies alone, or in conjunction with development and validation of clinical outcome assessments and biomarker studies to address the unmet needs in rare neurodegenerative diseases in children and adults. Eligibility, we accept, as in all of our programs, all entities except outside the federal agencies. So federal agencies may not apply, but foreign or domestic, public, private, for-profit, and nonprofit entities are welcome. The disease must obviously be neurodegenerative as well as rare, as defined in our definition. For this particular RFA, there's not a limitation on budget, although you'll need to be justified and adequately so and reviewed to make sure that it's relevant to your study. It will be limited to a 4-year award, and our awards will be contingent upon the, obviously, FDA appropriations, sufficient of meritorious applications, and quality of those applications. But we expect to fund somewhere between 1 and 3 new awards this year with this funding opportunity. So to wrap up, OPD has been very successful in contributing to product approvals, publications, regulatory decisions, standard of care changes, as well as the rare neurodegenerative disease product development. There continues to be a high need for quality clinical trials and clinical studies for rare diseases, and we continue to make those changes in our grants program to meet those needs, as well as increase the impact of both the programs that we administer. There's a large need that remains for funding in rare disease space, and so we want to work together to make sure we bring products to these rare disease patients. And I'll leave you with this reminder of our open opportunities left for this funding year. We do have a resubmission date in June for our clinical trials studies. So if you had come in before and you are looking to improve, that June is a receipt date, but we do have 2 new receipt dates for fiscal year 25 on there listed as well. And then our natural history and biomarker study for rare neurodegenerative diseases is May 6th, as I mentioned. So thank you very much. And
okay. Hello, thank you for everyone for coming. I really value the time that you all give us, and both for attending this meeting, but also, you know, in the patient community in particular, the hours and input that you've given us has been invaluable as we move forward, and so we want to thank you for that precious gift of your time. Come back a little bit to what Klaus had said in the opening, is that, you know, the CPATH isn't a new organization. It's been well over 15 years old. One of the things that we've done a really good job is being a neutral convener to establish public-private partnerships. Our focus is really around addressing unmet needs to advance drug development. So what does that mean? You know, and when you do clinical trials, everyone wants the shortest trial that could be done, scientifically valid. You know, we work on solutions to try to determine what that thing's for you by using the data. We may work on things that influence controls and shrinking the sample size that might be needed for control populations. It might be discussing endpoints that might be better or more efficient, and so that disease states can be studied in ways that so that they're measuring things that are meaningful to persons with lived experience. So part of our remit is really, you know, think of us as a group that takes existing information, synthesizes it in a way that is impactful for drug development, and expedites that. And so how we do that is we bring all together a broader community. And really this, you know, that may include persons with lived experience, advocates, which is many of those in this room as well as online, industry partners who have unique insights about their products and how the challenges they might have done in undertaking a specific project, academic researchers who may have worked on the initial science, who may not have the ability to translate into a regulatory solution. We help take the next step to be able to do that. And key center to this are regulators who give us regular and frequent feedback on the direction and the tools that we're being synthesized. And so if you can look at this, is we try to optimize and we de-risk areas relevant to drug development. This is a retool of what Klaus said, and I just want to point down to how that's implemented. Initially the big step, and I'll talk about some of that in the first part of these slides. But once we assemble that group, we work to define the unmet needs, and then we apply a set of core competencies to whatever the unmet need questions are. We put them in a regulatory context so that a regulator can understand them, and the tools we develop really support that, addressing that unmet need. So obviously things around biomarkers, data management and standards. Klaus mentioned RDCA DAP. It's a very unique data warehouse with 40-plus rare diseases in it. Each was representative with multiple data types. Model and analytics groups with various skill sets in DHTs as well as AI. Clinical outcomes assessments. One of the challenges in many rare diseases, particularly ones that don't have a regulatory precedence, is that there may need to be an evaluation of that endpoint and understanding what its placebo effect, for example, might be, or how that be better applied for a clinical trial. And then we have, obviously, a program that supports regulatory science. The end product is a drug development tool that addresses that specific unmet need. And this is a bit dated, but one of the things that we've been very successful at CPATH is getting regulatory endorsement in our tools, either it be a fit-for-purpose program or through qualification. And so the other advantages that our tools are made to the public space. They're freely available to the public community, and so that they can be most beneficial for the broader community to basically serve that public health need. Now, coming back to CPR&D. CPR&D was established as pursuant to the Act for ALS. FDA and NIH selected Critical Path Institute to stand up a critical path for rare neurodegenerative diseases. And so this public-private partnership was established to really begin to start implementing the PPP under the Act. And the rest of this conversation is I'm going to focus on sort of the ALS parts of this, and then Trina Martinez will be talking to you about some of our other programs in Huntington's disease and the ataxia programs. And then I'm going to talk to you about, we're not done. As Klaus recalled, this is an invitation. We really want to open this to the broader community and continue to look at other rare neurodegenerative diseases and seeing what we can accomplish. The beauty of this alignment is that there's a lot of shared learnings that occur within this ecosystem, and so we're excited about learning from each other in this rare disease and applying these questions to how the solutions might be established. One of the things that's really critical to this effort is the guidance that we receive from the persons with lived experience in the nonprofit community. And so we regularly have conversations, and as I look across the room, I recognize many faces that have been on calls, but also the directors of outreach that represent some of that initial driving of stakeholders. And so those are key parts of our effort. Now, I'm just going to level set and just sort of get a little history, since my cohorts in crime are in different orders and they're all kind of connected. We spend a lot of time on calls and trying to orchestrate the connectivity between each of the organizations. And so under Section 3 of the Act, there are really multiple efforts, and the ones I'm going to talk about are CPR&D. So you've learned a little bit about that. Our focus is really about taking existing data and synthesizing them into a solution for an unmet need. And that can be, in biomarkers, it can be DHTs, COAs, it can be simulation tools, it can be standards, and pretty diverse. AMP for ALS, which is Shubhangi will talk to you about in a bit. What they are working with is in partnership with NIH to really focus on the biomarker space, and then looking at things that would support efforts that are in the translational sciences. All ALS is an NIH-funded initiative, and that focuses on, just think of this as, this is the testing lab. This is where we deploy, where we identify gaps. This is where we actually go through and study, what needs to be studied, and we fill in the gaps of information that we'll solve and make the things that we want to accomplish more possible. And what you can see here is there's an interplay between all these groups. It's a very elegant orchestra in which, if you look at in this, the patient with lived experience is the center, but each of these entities, are aligned with their respective partnerships, CPATH with FDA, NIH with FIH, and then the coordinating centers with NIH. What we all do is we look at each of the problems and solutions with a specific lens, and then we communicate. And so we're always constantly learning from each other and then working together to fill in the gaps where one individual effort would be not successful in by itself. And so this coordination of activity sets up just a beautiful symphony. Now, I'm going to come back here and just sort of tell you, last year, it's been roughly a year since we had our initial kickoff meeting. Since that time, we've recruited a team, which is many of those people are in this room, and what we did was the landscape analysis. We also engaged our partners with NIH and FIH and FDA to begin to think about, what are the needs? And so we each looked at our own needs assessments in our specific lens, many times in concert with one another. And so each of these buckets really represent sort of a project stream which we undertook in the last year. We focused on the patient-focused drug development project, and what we did was we networked with as many nonprofit organizations as possible, also with patients with lived experience. We looked to streamline those efforts with those that are going on with NIH and FIH so that we didn't cause an increased burden to the patient community. And then we kept on engaging them in an ongoing feedback as we continue going forward. In fact, many of us meet with the patient community every other week. So there's a lot of dialogue that's going on. For us, data landscape, we have what I call the humongous data set of a spreadsheet, which we assembled that literally looks at all the different types of data around the world that focuses on ALS. We tried to characterize what they were, where they lived, what kind of architecture, things that would help us prioritize the need because we don't want to take 10 years to create an infrastructure around data. We also looked at clinical trials as well. And then we looked to try and assemble and what needs and where gaps would be established in this space and how to prioritize those and for data sets that could be moved much more quickly and might be more impactful readily. We looked at biomarkers and what available literature was available there, and we talked to KOLs to really identify, what were the ones that might be most readily and impactfully moved forward. And we completed a biospecimen cataloging exercise where we tried to identify biomarker samples that might be available, or biospecimens that might be used for biomarker research early on. We are in the middle of a COA landscaping exercise right now, following the patient-focused drug development guidance, and we will have recommendations for that and where they should be, how best to move forward to address the concepts that are missing information in existing endpoints, hopefully by this summer. And then one of the things we've talked about a little bit about was modeling. We wanted to understand, we didn't want to repeat what had been done before. We wanted to build upon what was done before. And so we did a landscape analysis where we looked at all the simulation and modeling that was done to try to find out what things were successful, what things worked, what algorithms were out there, so that we could build upon those successes. And then lastly, one of the things that was echoed in the person's lived experience community was the need for meaningful DHTs. And so we've taken that really to heart, and as you'll see in a minute, it's been an area that we've really paid a lot of diligence in the sort of the first steps of our deployment of our activities. And so, we tried to understand what methods are going on, what algorithms, what other things would be from a regulatory lens would be barriers for them to be used in clinical trials. And so that's been a big part of our activity. We've targeted them the existing data sets that might be most impactful readily to be archived in the data warehouse so that we can use them initially as quickly as possible. I want to come back to sort of each of these and blow these up a little bit more. And one of the things that we wanted to include a person's lived experience in all the things we did. And I'm going to talk about this. The slide is for figure purpose, but just to give you some perspective of what this looks like is the advocacy communities are very active in multiple layers of this project. In addition to those regular touch points where we actually hear and discuss the progress that we're doing with the person's lived experience community, they give us ongoing feedback in various aspects of different working groups. They're as participants, as well as people that we can address and ask questions to. They're very integrated into this process. I feel very fortunate, and I saw many of them are registered on this call. I want to express our deepest thanks for your activity. The other thing that's doing is that we're sharing these across the ecosystem so that there's repetitive messages and we're not extra burdening patients. So, like, for example, if Tom, who's our Director of Outreach, or Rebecca, who's or the similar correlate at NIH, if they need to convene someone, we're not having multiple side conversations and overburdening people with their time. Now, this is just this is a section from the patient-focused drug development outcome guidance, and I wanted to sort of give you an update where we're at for this. One of the things about this is that I want to stress is, and I want to express our deepest thanks for FDA, and particularly Michelle, for how entrenched she's been in this process and very supportive. She meets regularly with us to discuss the readouts, and has been very insightful in helping us really reframe, where we need to go, and then getting input from FDA at these times has been really supportive. One of the things that I heard over and over and over again when we were landscaping is the love-hate relationship with the ALS FRS. And, FDA charged us with boil the ocean. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is we've done, with support of our COA scientist, our vice president for our COA programs, is really to begin to understand the disease through literature review, identifying concepts in literature, look at scales and measures that are already out there, and really do a thorough dive into this area. We've mapped things to concept right now, and we have a list of more commonly used scales that we'll begin to compare against those concepts. And by the end of the summer, we may have a set of recommendations for which concepts that we do not have measured in existing tools, so that can be further studied in, say, the all ALS effort. We also are meeting with them on a regular basis now to examine their scales for the regulatory utility, and that's helping guide their study design so it's most impactful, and so that the natural history studies, that the investments are, that the outcomes are as regulatory ready or ready for drug development as possible. The other area, and I apologize for the bright yellow slides, is that this is a slide that the combined group did to decide or to explain the data warehouse. One of the messages that we heard was the need for a comprehensive data warehouse for ALS. Remember we did the landscaping to identify the data sets. One of the things that we wanted to do is really create that resource so that it could fuel drug discovery, and it could be an evolving platform so that it would grow with the growth of knowledge that we would have as the program established itself. We wanted the data in it to be as usable for regulators and for sponsors, and so we've had to put it in a different lens than, say, normal academic research or like data standards and other things that would be as most needed could be deployed. And so one of the beauties of this comprehensive data warehouse is that we criteria, we tiered the data sets based on their quality and initially from what we could tell and what their contents were. And then we prioritized those for development, and we assigned sort of who was going to be the point to bring them into the warehouse, and it would really link to where the strengths of that program was. For example, critical path is very strong with clinical trial registry data. It's very good with clinical-facing data that might be for regulatory use. However, NIH's experience in omic data is just stellar, and so what we did was, in order to expedite with time, is created a federated model between the two programs where you could, from the external faces, you could look from a common data portal, but then capitalize on the strengths of both parties and you make all of the data usable and integrated together. What's going to happen is we're focusing on existing data now, but What's eventually going to happen is the ALS consortium becomes established and new clinical trials become available, is those will also go into the data set. The goal of this is to make this broadly shareable and a resource within the community. Where we're at with this right now, after choosing the platforms between the two parties, we were initially targeting roughly about 10 data sets per year. It's coming in, and amongst the 25 data sets that were looked as priority review. Right now, I'm a bit of a metrics person because I think that it gives us where we're heading. So over the last couple months, we've sent out 14 contribution agreements to different resources that were in the high priority data sets that might be impactful for initial work. We have one DCA signed and 2 DUAs, and we've already got 2 data sets that we're pulling into the archive. And we have one that's very close around DHTs that we hope to begin the final steps in transferring that as well. And so that will kick us off for some of our initial projects in creating drug development tools. Now, I'm going to switch gears and do a little bit hypothetical. Trina will talk to you about other types of developmental tools. What I wanted to do is talk about some things so you can give a flavor. I had a conversation about, this earlier with someone in the audience, about like trial simulation and drug development tools relating to what, and their interest in AI and wanting to think about how to design better trials, but also have trials that you could be more predictive of things like sample size or duration or factors that might change, your trial design based on, the covariates of that trial or inclusion criteria. And so one of the things that's probably one of the most established programs that Critical Path do is this quantitative modeling program. And along with the real-world data platform, it's a perfect marriage. And what I mean by that is that between those programs is that the ability to make regulatory grade data and taking in all the different variables across diverse data sets is something that they do really well. And then our modelers are very capable of taking all the covariates and patient factors and duration and scales and all the other variables that you need to think through across those very complicated data sets, and putting that into a simulation tool where you can predict things like, as we see, the sample size and whatnot, placebo effect, and can keep going down the list. But it's a very useful tool. And for a sponsor, that's useful for helping determine things subtly, like as trial duration, sample size, all those things. And it's in a format that's regulatory endorsable. So I'm going to give you an example from Duchenne's group, just so you see what the interface looks like. But this just sort of tells you in some examples of what that looks like. We produce these as a Shiny app, and they're produced, and the lead of that consortium is in the audience, and you can get her autographs in a minute. But you can take the various parameters, and then you can model various aspects of the outcome, and you can look at different cohorts, and whatnot. And what's useful is you can start exploring your trial before you enroll individuals. And so, this gives you a lot of different plots, a lot of visualizations, and these tools that we do are created alongside regulators at the agency. We do get our tools endorsed by EMA, but the beauty is that in real time we work with this to try to create things most efficiently. And so these tools are aimed at improving the efficiency by which trials are done. Now, I just want to close with one final point, is that and Shubhangi will talk about some of the mirror aspects of this, because there's combined working groups and biomarkers that are active across different of these groups, and we all sort of collaborate in these areas. So, one of the things you'll learn at the AMP is that we've undertaken a biospecimen as we survey to look at specific samples for biomarkers. FNH will be looking at how to fund those, and the candidate biomarkers that have been discussed. And so this information will be set up to, get started as fast as possible about looking at biomarkers, and not have to wait for new samples to be available through the ALS consortia. The other things that we're looking at is in taking, biomarker prioritized data sets so that we can get going and identify what might be gaps under context of use, so that if there's missing sort of areas or populations that might benefit from samples, then because the data does not exist in existing data, that we can fund this, we can provide that feedback to NIH and FNH to undertake that. I talked a little bit about the DHTs. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. And basically what I want to reinforce here is that this is an integrated system. You know, with key players here at FDA, CPATH, NIH, FNH are working together with the MPO and patient with lived experience community. We also work regularly with sponsors and academics to begin to really solve this thing for ALS. And we're looking forward to the next year, and we'll be able to report more back into the coming space. And with that, I'm going to invite Trina Martinez to come to the podium, and she will talk to you about the HD programs and the ataxia programs at CPATH.
Colin. It is my pleasure to be with you here today to give you some perspective and insight into some work that we're doing at the Critical Path Institute for Huntington's disease and ataxia. Within my role on Colin's team, the CPR&D program, I lead two of our rare neurological consortia, one focused on ataxia, specifically spinocerebellar ataxia, and another one focused on Huntington's disease. I'll start first giving you an introduction to the Huntington's Disease Regulatory Science Consortium, because this one's a little bit further along. Our ataxia consortium is a newer consortium, so I'll first give you a perspective of the work that we're doing in Huntington's and then wrap up with the spinocerebellar ataxia space. So the Huntington's Disease Regulatory Science Consortium was founded in 2018, and it leads collaborations to accelerate advancement of Huntington's disease therapies to improve the lives of all affected. Huntington's disease is a complex, inherited, genetic, rare, progressive neurological disease that is really complicated and complex in its etiology and progression. So we bring all of the relevant stakeholders in this space together in a neutral forum to work on identifying the unmet need and solutions and tools to accelerate regulatory grade tools for Huntington's disease. In our recent efforts, HD Risk has kind of pivoted some of the work that we've been doing recently in all of our different working groups to focus the next stage of the evolution of our research plan on optimizing drug development tools for earlier stages of the disease continuum. And on my next slide, I'll show you what I mean by these earlier stage efforts. We leverage the Huntington's Disease Integrated Staging System as a foundation for these efforts, and that's also on the next slide. That helps us really keep an eye on the continuum of the disease and the different aspects of what the individuals with Huntington's disease are experiencing in earlier stages, intermediate stages, and later stages. So that's what we'll get into next. The Huntington's Disease Integrated Staging System is a conceptual framework for Huntington's disease and the work that we do within HD Risk within the different working groups. It incorporates genetic, biomarker, clinical, and functional endpoints. And its entire objective and the way that we apply it as this sort of overarching framework in the consortium is to articulate and understand Huntington's disease from a biological basis. Because similar to many neurodegenerative diseases, they occur, or the symptoms manifest later in life. This is something that is, likely occurring, and biological changes are happening earlier in the disease stage, and that continues to aggregate over time, adding in complexities of aging, et cetera. So what we're really working on with this staging system is to understand the disease from a biological component across all of the different stages and the full continuum of the disease. So Huntington's disease, I mentioned earlier, is rare, progressive, neurological, and it combines a lot of features from other disease areas. So it has a movement component to it, which is similar to other movement disorders like Parkinson's or ataxias. It has cognitive changes, which are similar to Alzheimer's disease. It also has behavior and personality changes similar to schizophrenia. So there's a lot of complexity in this space. And what the integrated staging system does is bring together the decades of fundamental and translational research in the Huntington space based on extensive published evidence to articulate what the earlier and intermediate and later stages of the disease look like from the biological component. And this is what can then be used in its totality as a clinical trial enrichment tool that can identify individuals and endpoints on a stage-specific basis. So if you can slow progression across any of these stages, you can really, begin to understand at the global level how this would help individuals with the disease and caregivers pause, for example, in a stage, slow progression to the next stages. So any slowing of this progression could lead to long-term decreases in morbidity and mortality. So I don't have time to go into all of the tools that we're working on within the Huntington's Disease Regulatory Science Consortium, but I just want to highlight here a few of the drug development tools and solutions that we're working on and the impact that has in this space. So I mentioned the integrated staging system. This can be used, and the impact can be articulated as a clinical and trial enrichment tool, and it will hopefully enable prevention or early stage disease-modifying trials. We are working on a clinical trial simulation tool. Colin showed you a moment ago an example of a clinical trial simulation tool for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We have a similar tool for Huntington's disease, and this, of course, is aimed to help optimize clinical trial design. We are working within our biomarkers working groups. We have one focused on fluid biomarkers and another one focused on neuroimaging. We're actively trying to advance biomarkers for Huntington's disease in both of those domains, and these will help to improve the ability to detect disease onset and also sensitivity across progression. And then we are also working within our clinical outcome assessments working group and digital health technologies working groups on novel outcome measures and endpoints. And the impact that these will have is improving the ability to detect disease onset and changes and meaningful symptoms. So this is the summary of what we're working on in the Huntington's Disease Regulatory Science Consortium. And I want to emphasize again that this is a consortium that's about 5 or 6 years into its progression and scaling efforts. Next, I'm going to show you what we're working on within the ataxia space. But just in a quick summary of Huntington's disease before I move into that, this is just a snapshot of some recent publications the consortium has been involved in. And again, the regulatory submissions for the clinical trial simulation tool I was describing that has been submitted to both the FDA and the EMA. And we're continuing our efforts in this space, and I look forward to giving you an update on this down the road. So now switching gears to our critical path to therapeutics for the ataxias. I hope everybody is keeping an eye on the acronyms. There will be a pop quiz at the end. This is a newer consortium, as I mentioned. It's not as far along as Huntington's disease. This was actually founded on Rare Disease Day in 2021. And this is a consortium focused on therapeutic development for spinal cerebellar ataxia. The overall goal of CPTA is to, again, leverage the neutral convener aspect of bringing the entire diverse stakeholders of the ataxia community together to collectively identify the needs, identify the solutions, and work together to accelerate development of novel therapeutics in rare inherited ataxias. Earlier, I was speaking to Andrew Rosen from the National Ataxia Foundation. They're an important member of CPTA. We were talking about how in the rare neurological space, you need a village, you need an army, and I was saying that's absolutely true. And then I would argue that data is our ammunition. So much of what we do in this space is data-driven. Klaus is speaking about our data analytics platform. Colin emphasized the importance of it. The specific way that we apply the data and the data platform in ataxia is one of the early efforts of the CPTA consortium was to build an integrated ataxia database. This is hosted on that Rare Disease Cures Accelerator data analytics platform, one more acronym for you. And on this platform, we actually, with the data that's been contributed by the National Ataxia Foundation and other groups in Europe, it represents the largest publicly available ataxia database. This brings together over 1,600 individual patient-level data inputs, spans 7 different spinal cerebellar ataxia types, and again, is really what is driving and informing our scientific strategy as well as our regulatory strategy. So leveraging this database as a foundation, CPTA endeavors to optimize clinical endpoints and develop a biology-driven integrated staging system similar to what I showed you for Huntington's disease that will capture the clinical relevance and meaningfulness and what matters most to people living with spinal cerebellar ataxia, their families, and caregivers. So this should be a familiar diagram because it's adapted from the one that I showed you earlier in the Huntington space. This is how we're kind of bringing this philosophical approach to the biology-driven staging that's been developed in Huntington's disease, early Alzheimer's, also Parkinson's disease, and aggregated alpha-synuclein-related disorders, bringing this overall philosophy to spinal cerebellar ataxia, because we do have the opportunity for genetic diagnosis and understanding what that really early genetic risk state looks like. Then we can start looking at biomarkers that would be changing, that are linked to that mutation, but are not yet driving observable clinical symptoms. So we're looking at what we know from this data that we have in our database and how we can mine that to look at the biomarkers and the changes in either digital health technologies or clinical scales, and then making sure that we're bringing a very thoughtful regulatory science approach to the whole process, looking at each of these stages and the data, the endpoints, the biomarkers, et cetera, and asking what concept of interest is optimal for each disease stage, what is the best outcome for each stage. So this is very much a work in progress. This is aspirational. We're building to this. I don't want anyone to think that we have this done and dusted staging system for ataxia just yet, but we're putting that village, army, and data to work to develop it and get there. Just to wrap up, I want to emphasize the tools that we're working on in CPTA. I mentioned the staging system and the impact that that would have for clinical trial enrichment and potentially enabling prevention or early intervention trials that are disease-modifying. I highlighted our integrated ataxia database. This will inform our research plan and regulatory decision-making, and then also our work within our outcome measures working group, where we're trying to develop novel outcome measures and endpoints, which will improve the ability to detect onset and changes in meaningful symptoms. So that is the summary of what we're working on in Huntington's disease and spinal cerebellar ataxia at CPATH. It was my pleasure to give you that quick introduction and set you up for your acronym pop quiz later. I will still be in the room if anyone has questions specific to these efforts and consortia. And my contact information is also on one of the other slides, so please feel free to reach out.
Thank you this will be the end of the CPAP portion of this, and then we'll have Q&A later, so feel free to give us your questions. The last part of this, I wanted to come back to, comments that were echoed with Klaus and similar with myself, is that we're not done. And what I really wanted to really, start discussion around, you've heard how we operate, you've heard a lot of the tools we bring to the table, but I want to open the doors for an invitation so the next slide will give us our content information, but I want to make sure that y'all know that the doors are open to discuss collaborations. We want to encourage, working with the broader community and to really roll up our sleeves and to make meaningful impact. In addition to efforts that we've talked about today, we have other efforts that are done through our partnership, through RDCA DAP, or done as combined efforts within the R&D program and the RDCA DAP program. We have what we call a task group, which is that's going to focus on a trial simulation tool in PSP. That's active as we speak. We have ongoing discussions right now with the FTD community, really to look on data, but also discuss things relevant to biomarkers, which participated in a common research roundtable with them, and have ongoing discussions about how best to move forward to address some needs with their community. We also have a task group that's focusing right now in developmental epilepsy encephalopathies, and a little bit unique focus. The large community wanted to focus on non-seizure related endpoints, and so one of the things that we're in discussions of talking about data standards and relevant endpoints that might be so the broader community begin to collect data, inform them about common data elements and standardization, and try to move forward as a common, coordinated program. The last one, we've had some initial conversations with the spastic paraplegic group, and we're beginning to. They've got some exciting things going on with larger scale data collection with centers of excellence, and we're going to be talking with them about what their unmet needs in that community are and how to best align to create solutions that might de-risk drug development in that space. So back to the punchline is our doors are open, they're wide open. We want to collaborate. We'd love to work and discuss opportunities to work with you. This is the sort of the team here that's reflected in this community. As you can see, we're reachable. We respond to emails, contacts. We love to hear from you, but wanted to make sure that you all have those. And I will pass the baton back to NIH, Dr. Temes.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So, yeah, my name is Amir Temes. I've been with NIH over the last 11 years and lead the Division of Translational Research, where we do all sorts of wonderful things, and this was a perfect opportunity for us to think beyond implementing ACT for ALS and think broadly about what we do strategically, thinking about 500-plus diseases that we cover within NINDS, majority of which are actually rare diseases. So the mission of NINDS is to really look at fundamental knowledge about brain and the nervous system and think about how best to reduce the burden. I can assure you that I have a very small staff in my division, but they are really dedicated to think about this mission every day when they go to bed and when they wake up at night, in the morning. So this is what we do. We're really proud of it. And over the next 10 minutes, I hope to parachute you into our sort of efforts to give you a good feel about what we do. And just to follow up on sort of the same theme, we are here in D.C. area. Our offices are always open, and we look forward to feedback from the community because everything we do is for the community. So we can only be informed by the community, and hopefully we can do our job better. So what we do is listed here. We do fund basic translational and clinical neuroscience research. We do this through various activities, grant funding, and other contract resources. We provide training resources, career development to make sure that there's a vibrant community that does the research, either in the academic area or industry. And we also promote dissemination of scientific discoveries. In our particular case, we're really interested in therapeutics. So we go beyond discoveries that are published in publications. We want to see patients benefiting from these therapies. So that's where we're actually a very product-driven group. This is a pretty high-level picture, but I wanted to make sure that you see the extent of which we holistically think about advancing therapies from the left-hand side, which is preclinical readiness, proof-of-concept studies, someplace in the lab, all the way to the right-hand side, which is clinical trials, marketing surveillance, and dissemination. We have lots of projects here. I won't have time to go through every one of them with you, but I will highlight some of the things that are really important to us, and we think that will really help us push the science forward from basic research towards patients. So what's our strategy? We had a strategic plan a few years ago, a lot of which is actually published on our website, but the bottom line for translation is all about bringing the right care for the right patients at the right time. And involves essentially measuring, supporting discovery and development of biomarkers, many of which you heard already today. We'd like to provide resources to support therapeutics development, pursue interventions specifically for rare diseases, and consider other ethical consequences. Because as the technology is evolving, as we're moving into gene targeting therapies and devices, we want to make sure that we're doing the right things by the patients. And finally, we want to make sure that we validate some of these measures. We want to make sure that we have the preclinical designs that best recapitulate clinical outcomes. We want to support first-in-human trials, which are actually really tough to do, and it's not typically supported in a transition from academia to industry. So a lot of the industry standards are to say, well, show me some proof of efficacy in clinical trials before I move into the space. And one of the key steps to get there is actually phase 1 trials. And that's where we think we can actually build a really nice bridge between advancing some academic discoveries into clinical trials. And then obviously support any other type of evaluating mechanisms to really measure efficacy. Now, on the right-hand side, you see a really interesting cartoon that that I was fortunate enough to get from my colleague Rebecca Corlo. As part of our strategic plan, we are really emphasizing getting engagement from our colleagues and also people with lived experiences. And we do that at every stage of our thinking process and execution at NIH. So we welcome and we actively engage people at scientific review. We engage them at council. We engage them within our workshops and many other decision-making processes. So it really involves many of our activities, and we are only better for having involvement from people with lived experiences at multiple levels. So just going back to the biomarkers, we initiated a very focused effort on biomarkers right about 2018. It's to really help us identify, discover, develop, and really finalize biomarkers that are helpful in a clinical trial setting. We have 3 different programs to really establish this. They're listed in green and purple and blue. Suffice to say that over the last few years, we've been able to award at least 30 awards in this space, and we've discontinued some. The way we have set this up is to use phase mechanisms, so we can actually take some risk at the beginning and bring in some perhaps not so well-developed discovery biomarkers and allow us to really kick the tires with analytical method development, initial findings, and move these projects from what you see in the green all the way to the purple line, which is hopefully a meaningful biomarker with a context of use that's meaningful to patients that can actually be qualified. Now, if in fact there is actually a biomarker and a COA, we can be plugging right into our clinical trial readiness program. Now, this program has been around for a little while, and it's actually a pretty well thought through project that goes all the way to 2025 and offers what I consider quite a bit of funding for over 5 years. Now, this is actually for rare disease areas where the product is already established. So if you're ready with a product to move into clinical trials, you can certainly benefit from this program because not only you can validate your biomarker and actually think about your COA and think about your design and how best to approach your clinical trials. So biomarkers and COAs are enabling sort of science, but what do we do in terms of enabling technologies and therapeutics? In 2014, we established the IGNITE program, and we realized that we just needed 3 fundamental sort of pillars for any therapeutic program. One is to develop an assay, identify a key therapeutic agent. The other one is to develop and validate models that are predicting of what can happen in clinical trials. Because what you don't want to do, you don't want to spend 10 years developing a drug, going into clinical trials, establishing a big phase 3 trials just to find out your drug doesn't work. It'd be a lot easier if there was a tool that you can develop in a preclinical setting where you can actually test your hypothesis and save that dollar or save that resource or save that career to be able to answer some tough questions really early on. And that's what we can do in our PER 21-123. And also, we can support additional sort of agent characterization and in vivo efficacy studies. Now, not every drug has to have an in vivo efficacy sort of a model associated with it. A number of drugs, there's just no pharmacology available in animal studies or perhaps even beyond that. And that's okay. Not every therapeutic program needs to benefit from it. But if, in fact, there is a model, we'd like to provide that funding announcement to support it. Okay, so you establish your assays, you have your models, you have some discovery in your early therapeutic development, you identify some kind of a tool compound you want to advance. Then you can come into our Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Network. We do this on behalf of 15 institutes at NIH, and we do this in a very close collaboration through a MOU with our colleagues here at FDA, with CBER and CDER. We meet with them regularly to think about all the regulatory things that we have to think about as we develop these projects. But the idea is to essentially take an exploratory project, as you see in a cartoon on the left-hand side, and move it towards phase 1 clinical trials. Now, what's unique about this program is that we've learned that academics don't necessarily have all the resources to develop therapies. They don't have medicinal chemistry expertise. They don't have scale-up and manufacture expertise. They certainly don't have the regulatory expertise that can help them put together an IND package. We can do all of that. All we need is an idea. All we need is your lab to think about what the idea can be, and we support you by building a team around you with expert industry consultants and give you free access to all of our contract resources where we can do all this. We also provide this neurotherapeutic course for anybody who might be interested. That's in the bottom there. Now, we quickly found out after running Blueprint for many years that we have to think about ultra-rare diseases very differently. The timelines are different. The therapies are different. With the advent of gene-targeting therapies, we can actually get to a clinical trial in a much faster way. So we developed this network called Urgent Network, which is focused on ultra-rare neurological disorders. Now, this implies that we can go from a diagnostic on the gray side into a clinical trial in 3 years. And we are really serious about this, and we have now started at least 5 projects that are moving on that direction. We provide all the resources. We work very closely with the PI, and we have adopted the OTA mechanism to fund clinical trials, and we've adopted our actually Neuronext network, which is a centralized network with a central IRB, to be able to execute very quickly a phase 1 or perhaps phase 1B, or in fact phase 2 clinical trials, first in patient trials. So I really invite you to look us up, and would love to have some feedback about how Urgent Network can actually benefit from your input. Now, all of this said, there's a whole world of devices that have been developed over the last few years with having very much impact in patient lives. And so we do also have a device program at NINDS that really is focused about optimization, translation of early testing of therapeutic and diagnostic devices. We have over 10 funding opportunities that I've highlighted here, but suffice to say that it's been going for a long time. We have over 50 grants right now. We just launched the Blueprint MedTech Development Program. These are 2 hubs across the U.S. that actually solicit early device ideas, and through a very systematic methodology, we can get you from the early discovery into the development. Once you're there, you can actually benefit from all the different programs that you see in blue. And what we have done is we've essentially have NOCs for additional funds that we can find throughout NIH. So with Brain Initiative having some funds available, we can actually plug and play with any kind of these technologies. For example, within the helping end addiction long-term funds that are available to us. Again, we've kind of been able to do the same thing. So with these sort of standard program announcements in place, we can actually have NOCs to really move some of these fields quickly. I'll stop at that. I want to invite you to think about listening to our podcast at night or during the day. Maybe you can drive to work and think about what we do at NINDS. As I said, we are local here. We always welcome feedback, and I do want to acknowledge the working relationship that we've been able to put together with FDA colleagues. It's been super valuable to us. It's helped us move lots and lots of projects from early concept into clinical trials, and without them, it would have been impossible. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we are going to do a quick transition. We have another speaker joining us virtually. So at this time, we are going to invite Shubhangi to share her slides and welcome her. And you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Laura. Can you see my slides? I've shared them. All right.
Yes, we can see them.
All right, thank you. Just a second. All right, yeah. I'm extremely pleased to be here and provide an overview on FNIH and the Accelerating Medicines Partnership for ALS or AMP-ALS. Okay. All right, to just give a background on what FNIH does. Established by the Congress in 1990, the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, or FNIH, is an independent not-for-profit organization that convenes public and private partnerships between NIH, academic institutions, private companies, and patient advocacy groups. It creates and manages partnerships that advance breakthrough biomedical discoveries and improve quality of people's lives. It has supported over 600 programs till date and has over 90 active projects in its portfolio. It has been able to raise $1.5 billion in investments up to date. There are several major public-private partnerships that FNIH has led and managed. A lot of people within the audience, I'm sure, have heard of ADNI, or the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. It is one of the most impactful, largest, and the longest continually monitored Alzheimer's disease study that has been managed by FNIH. The ACTIVE program has played a key role in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a nationwide initiative that prioritizes and accelerates development of the most promising COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. Coming to Accelerating Medicines Partnership Program, or AMP. This was established under the then director of NIH in 2014. At the center of the AMP program is a common goal of accelerating new and effective therapies for patients. It operates within the pre-competitive space and leverages resources of NIH and the private partners to improve our understanding of disease pathways, to facilitate better selection of targets for treatment, and identify platforms and processes to accelerate new and effective therapies to patients. In the last 10 years, FNIH has led 10 AMP projects, raised close to $830 million in investment, working with 33 industry partners and 37 non-for-profits across 16 NIH institutes. So coming to AMP-ALS, as a component of the Act for ALS public-private partnership, AMP-ALS seeks to identify and expedite the development of effective new treatments for people living with ALS or at risk of developing ALS. As you can see, AMP-ALS has active participation from both the public sector and the private sector. AMP-ALS recently completed its design phase. The design phase was kicked off in June of 2023. And within the public sector, we have NIH, FDA, and the Critical Path Institute that have played a key role in designing this initiative. From the private sector, we had 9 pharma companies and 8 not-for-profits. We have almost all the companies that are currently working in this space. The The steering committee for the design phase was led by Dan Doctoroff, the founder of Target ALS, a not-for-profit working in this space, Stephanie Fredette, who's a medical director at Biogen, and Amelie Kubitz, who is a director for neurodegeneration at NIDS. As Colin mentioned, during the design phase, we had several working groups that were set up. One of the most pertinent one that I would like to speak about is the People with Lived Experiences Working Group. This was set up specifically to ensure that we had meaningful participation of PWLEs in all aspects of ALS. Members of this group were invited to the technical working group so that their inputs and feedback could be taken into consideration as we worked on the other aspects of ALS. During the design phase, we had a portal and data architecture working group that was set up to define the technical requirements to support the data architecture of the ALS knowledge portal. We also identified an appropriate ALS knowledge portal provider. The Extend Data Working Group was led by CPAT, and the purpose of this working group was to identify high-value existing clinical and molecular data sets that could be integrated into the ALS knowledge platform. We also had established a biomarkers and new clinical data working group. The scope of this working group was to develop research aims related not just to discovery, but also development and validation of new and optimized biomarkers for ALS research. There was another working group set up for the clinical endpoints, which was again led by CPAT, which identified the gaps and opportunities existing for patient-informed clinical outcome assessments, or COAs. During this transition phase, we've also set up a natural history study working group, which is working very closely to provide feedback to the All ALS study consortium that was set up by the NIH. This is to ensure that all the groups working in this space are working in tandem. We are all on the same page. Right. So as an outcome of all the working groups and the work that was done in the design phase, there were certain challenges and gaps that were identified. I've highlighted some of them here and how ALS is working to help them. So one of the key challenges that was highlighted is currently there's decentralized data storage or a need for harmonization of existing data sets. AMP ALS will establish an ALS knowledge platform. In a way, it'll act as a one-stop shop for academic and industry researchers to access high-value, de-identified, individual-level clinical and molecular data sets collected from people living with ALS, as well as at genetic risk for developing ALS. There's currently a low inventory of well-annotated longitudinal biospecimens to facilitate biomarker research. With this in mind, NIH has established the All ALS Clinical Research Consortium, which was announced in October of last year. The infrastructure for the All ALS Clinical Research Consortium has been provided by NIH, but the AMP ALS partners will be directing the biomarker research, the analysis that has to take place within the All ALS study. It'll perform a large-scale ALS natural history study with standardized collection of clinically annotated biospecimens as a resource for the broader scientific community. It'll analyze existing as well as prospectively collect data that's collected through the All-ALS study to advance biomarker development and identify biological pathways linked to sporadic or familial forms of ALS. The other challenges experienced in ALS research currently is delayed diagnosis and difficulties in assessing treatment responses. So to help with that, AMP-ALS will develop and validate diagnostic biomarkers through longitudinal study of pre-symptomatic persons at high risk for developing ALS and assessing biomarker specificity in distinguishing early stage ALS from other conditions. It'll also develop and validate monitoring biomarkers that reflect the disease pathology and the progression of the disease to inform clinical testing of investigational therapies in early stage proof of mechanism trials. The other limitations currently experienced is insufficient standardizations of COAs. As Colin mentioned, CPATH is leading this effort and is currently performing a landscape analysis of the COAs according to the FDA roadmap to ensure patient-focused outcome measurements in clinical trials can be identified. They're going to optimize COAs and address the regulatory requirements for filings. So the key AMP-ALS deliverables at the end of 5 years is to have the largest harmonized longitudinal ALS clinical data set that comprises not just data from ALS patients, but will also include pre-symptomatic data as well. It'll provide multimodal molecular analysis of longitudinal biofluid samples and postmortem tissue, including whole genome sequencing, gene expression, and proteomics data. It'll develop and validate new biofluid-based and digital biomarkers. As Colin mentioned earlier in his presentation, digital biomarkers has come up as a key priority, not just from PWLEs, but also from our private partners. So AMP-ALS will work in that to develop biomarkers to do early diagnosis, monitor disease progression, as well as a response to treatment. And last but not least, we'll work on optimizing current COAs as well as develop new patient-informed clinical outcome assessments. So currently, AMP-ALS is, we are currently actively fundraising for the program, and it is well positioned to be launched in early Q2 of 2024. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I want to echo what Colin and I, a colleague from NIH, just mentioned. We are always open to any kind of feedback or any questions that you might have. Please reach out to us. I can share my contact information later on, but you can always find it on the FNIH website. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shubhangi. So before we head into our panel, we're going to take a few moments to get our panel up to the front for Q&A and panel discussion. If we want to take a quick 5-minute break, if anyone needs to step out for a moment while we're bringing the panelists up, you're welcome to do that, and then we'll get started in just a minute as we bring everyone forward. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our panel discussion and Q&A. And at this time, I'd like to pass it back to Klaus Romero as our moderator.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. And thanks to our panelists. We have representation from CPATH, from multiple parts of the FDA, and from NIH. So this should be a very interesting dialogue about how to transform data into insights and turn it into actual acceleration for drug development. Michelle always tells me that the rule of thumb for when I'm moderating is making sure that she never falls asleep. So I will start with her. So Michelle, can you comment on the importance of when you're trying to assess and determine what is an unmet need in drug development, the importance of making sure that we incorporate the voice of the people with lived experiences in defining that unmet need and the proposed solution?
I can take that, and thank you. And thank you, everyone who's in the room, and I think those that are online for joining us on this Friday afternoon. And so I hopefully the audience knows and is aware of the FDA's efforts over the last decade towards patient-focused drug development, and really how do we make sure we're incorporating that voice into drug development. And when I joined the agency, when this was in its infancy, at that time it was really how do we make sure that we're measuring the right concepts, and we are capturing that in how we pick our assessments. But over time, and in the way we would only hope we evolve in science, it really has continued to evolve into how do we make sure we incorporate patients with lived experience, including their caregivers, into overall drug development, and where are those opportunities that they can help inform that, not just at one time point, right? So not just when we need to think about how should we measure these concepts, what is the informative information that can help us in maybe designing a trial, or really what are the challenges to getting to a trial site that need to be taken into consideration. And so incorporating and talking to families early, and I would even say often, I know that's something you hear us say about coming and talk to the FDA about, but it's always good to talk to the families early. They are the experts. They are the one true experts on what that lived experience is. I am not that expert. So please do not come ask me what I think we should be doing sometimes in the experience of disease X, because I'm not going to be that person. But you who are attending this meeting are those experts, and we should be making sure that your knowledge is being leveraged. And so there's multiple opportunities that can look like. I would say starting early before we have a clinical trial protocol. What do we want to do? What is going to be the right population? How is the readiness of that population? I think it's an exciting time in rare disease, and when I speak to patient groups, it's on a spectrum. We have folks who have successfully been able to see approved treatments, to the range of folks who are enthusiastically waiting for their turn, and they are trying to prepare their communities for what that experience could potentially look like, and preparing them for that readiness of what is going to be needing for that participation. There is continued conversations that we have about benefit risk and what are the risks that patients and their families may be willing to take. And we are continuing, as we are exploring how to continue to advance and accelerate rare disease drug development, is all of our rare diseases we know have some type of heterogeneity and or progression depending on them. And those needs are going to shift over time during the course of the progression of that disease or disorder. And so making sure we are capturing that full spectrum is critically important in all aspects. So we are upfront and very encouraging of efforts for patient-focused drug development. There's multiple ways to engage with the agency in that. So we have technical guidances for how to capture that towards if we're thinking about clinical outcome assessments. We have ways to engage for patient listening sessions where patient groups can come in and give us a quick snapshot, I would say, and we have many of them. I see plenty of you guys in the room, and I know online who have come in and engaged in that capacity. and that allows our medical product centers to come and just sit and listen. And that's where we learn the best, is when we can learn from you. We also have our patient-focused drug development program and those opportunities as well. So we are very much wanting to be able to learn from the patients' lived experience and their families' lived experience, but we should also say that those who are interested in drug development or any medical product development, to make sure they're continuing to also incorporate that voice as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. You mentioned something that I think is a good segue to ask Teresa, because you lead an office that is reviewing the products constantly. Michelle mentioned something about the early and often involvement, and so that's a mantra of come to the agency early and often. Can you comment on how important that is, not just from the standpoint of the sponsors, but also from the clinicians and the people with lived experiences?
Yes, so early engagement with the agency is critical. We have a number of venues that you can use to engage with the agency early. The main one would be for a company who is developing a product. They can engage with us by way of a formal meeting type called a pre-IND meeting, where we can provide early feedback on the planned initial studies to open an IND in a drug that's never been previously studied before. That does generally focus on non-clinical animal studies, toxicology studies, and chemistry and manufacturing. But in some cases, that can also be a drug that already has been developed and is being repurposed or has been studied in other countries, and sometimes those pre-IND meetings can start off at a later stage of development. But it is critical at that earliest stage, even at the point where you haven't gone into humans yet, in these rare diseases, to think ahead about what your program is going to look like. And that involves talking to patients and bringing patients to the table when you're engaging with regulatory authorities as well, because we need to understand the symptoms that the patients are experiencing, the time course of the disease, the heterogeneity of the disease, because that will all inform the type of advice that we can give on the most appropriate development path for the product. If there is opportunity for an accelerated approval pathway, which would allow the use of a surrogate endpoint that can be detected earlier than clinical outcomes, then that's a good time to discuss with us whether that is a viable path for the development program, or if there's the development of clinical endpoints to be considered that are going to be specific for a given disease, then it's also critical to discuss those early, because then you can do steps in the earliest stage studies to understand how those endpoints perform in the patient population, and potentially do some validation work so that by the time you're ready to move into the pivotal registration trials that are going to provide evidence of effectiveness, that you are going into those trials well armed with identified clinical outcomes and assessments and biomarkers that you can put into those trials and help to support the efficacy and safety of the product. I did mention pre-IND meetings. There is another early meeting type called an Interact meeting that's been more recently developed, and that also is another avenue to interact with the agency on the various early stages of development. Usually those are reserved for situations when there is a novel question that needs to be answered that has not been previously addressed by our guidances or other existing development programs that are in the public domain, but that is also another option. And then even, after, these are before the IND, but after an IND is initiated, we continue to engage, early and often with patients and developers through Type C formal meetings. We also have patient listening sessions for patients where they can come in and share. There's also externally led patient-focused drug development meetings that can be organized that we engage in. So there's a lot of ways not only for sponsors to engage with us, but for us to get patient input as well.
Fantastic, and I think that's a key message that you can engage with the agency even if you are not a sponsor and even if you don't have a formal review for a product start. And I think that's a key take-home message for the partnership that CPR&D represents. Amir, I recall a conversation that you and I had at one of the drug forum meetings at the National Academies, where you were stressing the importance of having cross-collaboration between NIH and FDA. Can you comment on how you see that happening as part of the reaction to Act for ALS and the partnership that is being established?
Well, it's been happening, and this has only put us on steroid, right? So we meet with our FDA colleagues regularly, and in all these meetings, we talk about all of our products that are coming towards evaluation, towards the walls here, and we get live feedback for what we need to look out for, what we need to maybe spend some more money on, or what are the things that perhaps are not necessary and is just coming in a way of us advancing a therapy so that it can actually get to patients quickly. So I can't emphasize how important that is, and I think that's a critical piece that a lot of our applicants are actually missing. Because as I said, academics don't necessarily have the resources to think about, okay, so once I've developed something, then what? And it's not really helpful to get there and then figure out, oh, I do need to perhaps have an IND on this. So it needs to be built in from the very beginning that you have a regulatory path and you have to consider it all the way through.
Yeah, and Colin, do you want to jump in right away, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's been fortunate. One of the nice elements to this, conversation, as you saw in the slides, is that, I look at colleagues that are in the room. We've got an impressive team that's now all sitting together and trying to work on solutions that each of us in our own would be a silo, and we could only go so far. And so this interconnectivity and feedback for really the multiple of parties with different lenses is very, very powerful. I think it's also caused a lot more diversification of those contacts as we've come to appreciate what each of the organization's skill sets are. So we're having a lot more other discussions, introductions, sitting in each other's meetings so that we can add commentary to, what might fill a gap that might not have been thought of, to be a lot more efficient with the resources and energies that we're going to apply to whatever rare disease.
Awesome, because I think this can be wrapped up with the impact that this collaboration can have on policy. So, Gumei, in your role at the agency, can you give us some commentary on how you see the collaboration providing some meaningful data and information and evidence for the policy role that you lead at the agency?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for the question. I would like to start by saying that, CBER is part of the Act for ALS Task Force in FDA. And the center has been collaborating very closely with all stakeholders.
Can you speak into the mic and make
sure
sure that...
all stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders, including CPATH and, CDER and NIH and Orphan Products FNIH, on this effort to implement the Act. As part of our effort, there are two CBER-specific initiatives that are outlined in FDA's action plan. One is the Neuro team. Neuro stands for Neurodegenerative Rare Disease Operation Team. We work really hard on that acronym. And so it includes the center and the office leadership. The goal of the Neuro team is to enhance communication and collaboration really within the center and across the agency, and to really support the effort to advance treatment for rare neurodegenerative diseases. The other initiative that we have is the Cell and Gene Therapy Safety Project, which is come back to the data part, right? So as more and more cell and gene therapy products enter clinical trials and more get approved, we are hearing from patients and families that there's a need to better understand the safety of cell and gene therapy products. Recognizing that need, CBER proposed this cell and gene therapy safety project as part of the action plan. And the project is to review applications for ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases and to identify cross-application safety signals for cell and gene therapy products. And with that information, we hope that we could inform future clinical trial design and conduct, as well as pharmacovigilance efforts. And of course, our work doesn't stop, at the two initiatives. We do recognize that with the fast growth of cell and gene therapy and the complexity of those products, and there are many unique challenges, which requires a collaborative approach like we're doing here today, and we are committed to really working with all stakeholders on this.
Fantastic. So, as I invite everyone in the room to come up to the mic with questions, I will ask our team to help us with any questions that we have from the online participants. And let's start with those.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay. So thank you, Klaus. I'm going to act as the virtual question asker. So the first one is, how are you expanding funding for other rare neurodegenerative diseases such as Huntington's?
Amir, do you want to start with that one?
Let's see. So Huntington's disease is obviously within the mission of NINDS, and we always look for opportunities there. That's all I can say. I mean, do we have 500 plus rare diseases, including Huntington's disease? So it's we are opportunistic in our approach. We have solicitations every 4 months, and we take anything that comes our way to our council. And we typically in the translational space, we don't go by pay line. So roughly NINDS funds anywhere between 15 to 16% of all the applications we receive. But we always look for opportunities that are true unmet needs and are informed by the community. So
great. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So next question. Can you explain the differences in the efforts between CPATH and the AMP for ALS? It sounds like there's overlap, and the two efforts, are they collaborating and communicating? I think we've touched on this a little bit.
Colin.
I can add to that. And I don't know if Shubhanji's still on the phone, but they're actually not duplicative. We've made intent to them to not be. What we do is we work together to identify where our strengths are as organizations and support the niche that we have. There's overlap in the focus, but what we provide in the whole portfolio is different so that they actually maximize the outcome. Maybe I can give you an example to help clarify that. FINH will support the biomarker analysis of biomarkers collecting new data. They're going to focus on collecting the data, generating it, whereas CPATH would take that data and look at it under a specific context of use and make it ready for the qualification program, for example, for FDA, so that it could be used in the broader community. We might go ahead and look at the existing data and map and say, these are the gaps under specific data that might be needed for a context of use. So that investment and that strategy is more aligned to streamline. And so, we result in, a faster outcome that requires less energy and less resources. So hopefully that answers that question.
And the punchline I would add to that is that AMP ALS will generate significant amounts of potentially very relevant data. And RDC-ADAP and CPR&D at CPATH can provide a home for those data for its maximum utility. So one more question from online, and then we'll go to the question in the room.
Yeah. All right, so my last question from online. Is there enough ACT for ALS funding to go around?
I think we would need to teleport ourselves to the Hill to ask and answer that question. If anybody wants to comment on that, I will just offer my perspective. Look, I mean, to me, it's a matter of making sure that we maximize the value of every precious data point. That's where it is. And so if we can ensure that every cent goes to the maximizing of the power of every data point, then we're going to be in a better place. And that also, if you start showing that, then that's when the communities that can go to the Hill and speak to the politicians can show the return on investment of the impact of the dollars that they allocate. That's what I would say, but I don't know if anybody else wants to comment from the panel. None takers? Okay, so let's go to the room, please.
Thank you very much. Paul Melmeyer with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Thank you, CPATH, FDA, NIH, and everyone for convening this meeting today. I have a question on another provision within the Act for ALS that we are very pleased to have within the law, and that's on the Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Action Plan that the agency published in June of 2022. I'm just wondering if the agency officials perhaps could provide updates on the accomplishments made within the action plan, and if there's any plan for any kind of public documents, and perhaps there already is that I'm unaware of, but just any public discussion of some of the accomplishments made that were outlined within that June 2022 action plan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Michelle?
I'm going to attempt to stab Paul there on answering that question, and also quickly recalling some of those some of our timeline that we had outlined of short, long-term, and medium, long-term objectives. And I do think that we are meeting them, and I think it's a great question because they may not be as visible as one thinks with our actively ongoing efforts. So, you know, we have got our internal task force up and running, and we meet pretty regularly, and we are having discussions that are impacting all three medical product centers. So while we have our CDER and CWER colleagues here today, the Center for Devices is also part of this effort. And so we meet pretty regularly to have those discussions, and they've been ongoing. I know in one of the areas that we've been obviously talking about, we know it's a very hot topic right now, is the use of digital health technologies. And so we are continuing to help do some of the advancement. And so some of the work and the goals that were outlined in our timeline are, as Jacqueline said earlier, actually broader to some things that were already currently going on. So, you know, we have finalized the DHT guidance. We are continuing through the various opportunities that the medical product centers have in the DHT engagement space to be able to learn more from the public and from private areas to come in and provide us informative information as we continue to learn together in that area. The getting data sharing and some of those efforts, and so I think some of the task force efforts that will be happening through CPR&D will be able to be informative into perhaps advice that we can provide in future drug development submissions. So we are definitely, I think, through efforts that were either currently occurring at the agency, and we were able to enhance them even more now, you know, in a way, as well as things that were kind of, you know, we were being in discussion and now have come to fruition. I was actually recently thinking about the action plan, going, I need to go back and recheck and kind of see where we are, because I do think that we have been working on that. I think, Paul, and I hope you would agree with me, I think often, and this is a conversation I have with a lot of patient groups, is sometimes it's hard to see what that looks like, right? Because so much of the FDA work is tied to the review of medical product applications. And so it may be a little hard to see, and so you have to kind of take the word we're saying. But I will say that we are working hard through various ways to do that, and I think that when we can discuss again, you know, in the near future about what some of that looks like with additional examples, I think will be beneficial. But we are trying to accomplish those goals, and I do think that all learnings that we are undertaking will not only inform not only ALS, but all rare neurodegenerative diseases and the rare disease community as a whole.
Awesome. Yeah, more questions online. Tom.
Sure thing. One last question for you. Can anyone share how the rest of the globe is included in these initiatives?
Colin?
I can add that. When we started our landscaping efforts, and I can echo, I think other conversations are going on the other science community, but when we started our landscaping efforts, we reached out to the global stakeholders and key opinion leaders and advocacy groups as part of that discussion. We have regular touch bases with them, and our data and other types of outreach will continue to have them. CPATH goes to Amsterdam to visit with EMA once a year, and it was interesting because without prompting, they asked us about rare neurodegenerative diseases, and many of the questions that they had were echoed by the audiences we had discussions with in the U.S. and in Canada. So it gave us really pause and whatnot, and they're copied and continued to be in the loop. Well, we do plan and we'll be making this international. I'll speak a bit for my NIH colleagues, is that we do have international researchers present to the working groups to advise what trial efforts are going on and other discussions, because we want to learn from each other, and then also advise them the same type of things that we would advise the U.S. audiences about data standards and study design and whatnot that would help us, because the combining of the efforts, everyone agrees, is that the shared learnings of a larger ecosystem are going to be beneficial for all those affected by rare neurodegenerative diseases.
I can give a quick example of actually this happening actively right now via the efforts to the Orphan, the Rare Disease Neurodegenerative Grant Program. And so one of the contracts is looking at the comparability of the ALS FRS. And as part of that effort, when we were designing the scope of work, was to include a patient committee. And we worked with both the ALS Association and the International Motor Neuron Disorder Alliance. I think I got that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize to Kathy Cummings, to identify patients to make it global. And so that patient committee is a global patient committee that spans 12 time zones. And if you listen to last week's FDA Rare Disease Day in the afternoon, some of those members of that global patient committee talked about their experience and how that has been beneficial. So we obviously recognize that drug development and medical product development is international, particularly global in our rare disease space. And so here, that is just one example I wanted to share of how we were able to bring in the global perspective through the patient voice.
Perfect. That's a really important aspect. And I think also we know that for some of these diseases, there are clusters of individuals that are geographically located, and they may not be located in the most advantaged areas or served areas. So that's another component of the global nature of the collaboration. One more question online?
Yes. One more question very quickly. Can you articulate how AI technology and tools are being integrated into the workflows and processes?
Colleen, do you want to start?
I'll let Klaus chime on this as well. One of the things that Critical Path has recognized as a competitive edge area for its development is the investment in AI strategies. One of the things that we've been discussing as we talk about like the RDCA DAP elements, but also the broader, like for example the ALS data portal, as how the portal would be ripe for and be set up in a way that AI methodologies would be more easily deployed. CPATH has a long history of using ontology mapping with that expertise, which I won't go into all the details there, but we're also looking at other NLP tools that will look at concepts and patient interviews and pilot projects around there. And that will also complement that and, additional investment in AI infrastructure. This will be an incredibly rich data set. I can't tell you how large, not only the existing infrastructure within RDCA DAP is now, but you then combine it and grow it in, this larger ecosystem that now has omics and clinical outcome tools and clinical trials. It's going to be an extremely, extremely powerful resource that I think AI methodologies that, with the researchers, both internal to our organizations, but also external to the broader community to facilitate discovery in rare neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah. One thing to add is that it's not like AI all of a sudden landed in a parachute in drug development like a month ago. AI has been a very meaningful presence in drug development for years. Everything that we do in terms of reading medical images through specific algorithms, that is an example of an application of AI approaches, and that's not necessarily the newest thing. It's really critical, but making sure that you understand the pieces of those algorithms and how they are intended to generate clinically interpretable information that you can plug into clinical trials to generate the evidence of efficacy and safety of medical products. That's just an example. Then there's newer stuff, certainly what Colin was mentioning, but it all hinges on understanding the unmet need, and if the solution requires an AI-based approach, beautiful. Let's make sure that we use the data to leverage that solution. Okay, in the room, Annie, please.
I want to thank all of you. This is really just incredible to have all these resources brought to the space. And I'm always in awe of just how much is out there to help people. And I know that it takes time to have those resources actually translate into the products that our community members need. So I'm Penny Dex with the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, and FTD is an interesting poster child for being at the intersection. We overlap clinically with ALS, where a lot of individuals at genetic risk for ALS are also at genetic risk for FTD, and the disease can co-manifest both in those genetic individuals as well as in sporadic individuals. We also overlap with Alzheimer's. We also sometimes show up in Parkinson's. We can be clinically misdiagnosed as psychiatric diseases. It depends on how it clinically manifests. But I don't think that we are unique in how we are rare. We are degenerative and horrible disease to live with until you die of it. And we are incredibly heterogeneous. And one of the challenges that I see for conditions like any rare neurodegenerative disease is starting from scratch each time that somebody wants to create a new outcome measure, or when somebody wants to create a new biomarker, or somebody wants to create a new clinical trial infrastructure, because how do you even run clinical trials in these spaces when you're spanning these types of heterogeneity? So I would just love to hear wisdom when you guys think about ACT ALS and all the initiatives that are coming out of it. And some of it seems to be, inclusive, like CPATH has got some other rare neurodegenerative disorders included, right? And you've got ALS, which I think is different. I won't try to mimic back or repeat back the specifics of the different initiatives, but I would love to hear some wisdom from all of you of how to leverage infrastructure to accelerate across rare neurodegenerative diseases. They're a tough space. Thank you.
Any takers? Yes, please.
I can have a stab at this. So I think the newer technologies, such as ASOs, can really be promising in areas where you can think about a very quick regulatory path, which our colleagues have set up, to go from really an idea to patients. And we actually have now a few grants that are coming in that are actually thinking about how quickly they can have various sequences help different stages of a disease, or different so maybe take it back, different stages of a disease and different symptoms of a disease. And that's actually real. So you can be in a lab and think about the genetic changes that you want to modulate and use the same sequences with an ASO or gene therapy. That could really be a plug and play. So we no longer need this traditional way of thinking about doing small molecules, this structure activity work, and thinking about formulation. We can go from a biology to a therapeutic within a couple of years. So that's going to be revolutionary for us. Now, we're really looking forward to those technologies to be developed. And I think the way FDA is set up for the regulatory path to be able to enable multiple sort of plug-and-play technologies to move forward on an existing IND is just amazing to me. So over the next couple of years, this is going to be a big deal in neuroscience.
Thank you, Amir. I'm going to have to, yes, Teresa, please.
going to comment that this issue of heterogeneous diseases, but with a common biological mechanism underlying it, is one that we face a lot in the Office of Neuroscience, and FTD is an excellent example of that. I think biomarkers will be a bridge across these heterogeneous diseases that, if they share a common pathophysiology, we'll be able to utilize biomarkers to demonstrate, to help identify a patient population that would respond to a targeted therapy that can monitor response to treatment and pharmacodynamic effects. It doesn't solve the problem of how we get to different clinical outcomes, and where, we are developing outcome tools that are ideally can be borrowed across diseases, but we'll still have to work to identify, even if we show a common biomarker, how can we measure the different clinical presentations of the disease. But I do think that the biomarkers will be an essential groundwork for allowing us to figure out how a targeted therapy that might impact say C9orf72 could impact frontotemporal dementia and ALS. We might have to have different outcome measures depending on the phenotypic presentation, but we can show, a biologic targeting for a given mechanism. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, next question from the audience, and I'm sorry, I'm motivated because I've been here in D.C. all week, and there's a flight waiting for me to take me back home, so I want to keep things on time. Please.
This will be quick. Brian Boggs with Curalis Corporation. This is a great panel. I love this. Thank you for setting this up. We've got 2 ALS drugs that are being developed overseas, and we're finding it very difficult, and I'm part of a group of over half dozen companies, small biotechs, that are developing their molecules overseas. It's not just ALS, it's other rare neurodegenerative diseases. We found that the meeting is very clunky for us in small biotech. We move much faster than that, and we need feedback faster than that. And I'm glad, Dr. Braccio, you talked about the Interact. I thought that was just a CBER program. It's good to hear that that's part of CDER also. I would like the panel to consider like a pre-START program. I assume that the START program is going to be a very good one. And having early discussions with companies before we get into the clinic so that we can start these in the U.S. are going to be very important. And I also encourage maybe a center for disease excellence, as in the oncology division has done, to look at rare neurodegenerative diseases. That might help from a policy standpoint, set some standards and help us too. So that's just a comment for consideration. Thank you.
Yes, we can follow up offline, but the collaboration itself also provides an early entry into some discussions about the process, not the individual products, because this is a neutral effort, but the process itself. So that's another potential value add. Yes.
Klaus, I'm your last guy before you hit that plane. Rich Brennan with the ALS Association. I just wanted to say thank you to you, thank you to everybody on the panel, everybody in the room today that is expressing interest in rare neurological diseases, especially ALS. Today was extraordinary as far as the amount of information that came in a very short amount of time. I'm just here to encourage that this is a great thing to have regular updates from our federal partners, from the public-private partnerships, really to share information, to get this online, to be able to encourage people that they need to engage in these efforts, because there's no, the ALS Association is just like one small factor in many of these interests, people that are coming to the interest of these things, and we are doing everything that we can to engage with all, partners. I think what I'm looking at is we are entering a new phase of this because we have this simulation from the Act for ALS and all these, great programs and activities going on, that we need to really continue to leverage as much as we can partnerships. I think that's really important, but also the patient's voices and making sure that they have input at all stages of these processes. So it's not just people like me and you that are in the room, that we actually are learning from the people that are on the ground. So we're committed to necessarily bringing, our patients before you all. We'll plan meetings. We'll do as much as we can to partnership with you. I hope that I meant that to be an encouragement for everybody online, everybody in the room to do the same.
Beautiful. I mean, you essentially closed the meeting better than I could. It is a close to action. It is definitely a call to action. The factors are aligned, and I'm going to steal a quote from the National Organization of Rare Disorders. Alone, we may be rare, but together we are strong. This is what this is about. Maximizing the value of every precious data point across the learnings that we can get from every data point for a given indication, but for rare neurodegenerative diseases in general, and then beyond. One of the things that and Ramon is taking a picture right now, but one of the things that is also important from the non-purely neurodegenerative diseases that we have worked on, the learnings from Duchenne that have been applied to, and Ron knows this, the integration of data for Friedreich's ataxia have been invaluable, and that's the whole point of coming together. So with that, Teresa, do you want to close us out?
Right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today, for those who spoke, for those who are in the room, and for those who are participating online. I hope everyone has heard today how committed we all are to advancing drug therapies, new therapies for ALS and the many other rare neurodegenerative diseases that are out there. We are all collaborating together. We are all working hard. We are all committed to finding therapies, cures for these diseases. We're trying to leverage every available tool we can with modeling and simulation, with biomarkers, with clinical outcomes, AI and machine learning. We are going to bring all of this together, and we will be giving you updates as we go along to bring you along with our efforts. And with that, I will go ahead and wrap things up, and we can call it a close. All right. I was going to ask you.